The arrow hit the standing stone 3 inches from Charles Sutton's left ear, and the woman who had thrown the knife that deflected it was already moving. He spun, heart slamming against his ribs, trap iron still in his hand, and saw her dropping from the top of a granite outcropping 12 feet above the moorland track. She landed in a combat crouch, both feet planted in the wet heather, a short recurve bow now in her left hand and a second knife appearing from somewhere at her hip, as if by conjuration. She was an orc woman, green-skinned, powerfully built, wearing close-fitted travel leathers the color of charcoal and pine shadow. The leather bodice was laced tight across a strong torso, her shoulders bare above it and marked with old clan ink. Dark breeches were tucked into knee-high boots, and a wide belt studded with bronze rings cinched everything together at the waist. Her hair was black and thick, braided back from a face that stopped his breath entirely, broad cheekbones, amber eyes that caught what little autumn light there was on the moor, and 2 ivory tusks that curved from her lower jaw with the elegant weight of something carved by a master. She was perhaps 28 or 30, and she was extraordinary. The second arrow never came. The archer, a man Charles could barely see in the gray mist between the standing stones, had vanished into the heather. The orc woman straightened, unhurried. She slid the knife back to its place at her hip and swept her amber gaze over Charles once, the way a person inventories something they may or may not have use for. "You are the trapper they call Sutton," she said. It was not a question. His voice took a moment to locate itself. "I am. Then you have a problem." She picked up her deflecting knife from the base of the standing stone, checked the edge, and sheathed it without looking at him again. "The man in the heather was hired by Wulfric Dawn. Wulfric Dawn also wants me dead. You and I have been placed on the same blood price by the same man, and neither of us seems to know why yet." She turned back to the track, already walking north. "You may follow or you may stand there. I am going to find out." Charles Sutton did 3 things quickly. He breathed, he picked up his trap iron, and he followed. He had worked the Coldwater trap line for 4 years, 40 miles of moorland running north from the town of Thresh along the Hag's Spine Ridge, a broken landscape of peat bog and standing stone circles, and lonely stone crofts that most people in the lowland villages thought of as the edge of the world. He set iron and snare and deadfall, and lived alone in a series of overnight shelters between the main depot at Thresh and the high shelter at Blacktarn. He was 32 years old, lean and weathered by 4 winters on the moor, with rough hands and a tendency to go weeks without speaking to another person. He was not, by any reasonable measure, an important man. Wulfric Dawn was the most dangerous fence and land broker in the Thresh Basin, and Charles had absolutely no idea what he had done to earn the man's lethal attention. The orc woman set a punishing pace north, reading the ground as she walked without apparent effort, stepping around soft patches of bog that would have swallowed Charles to the knee, ducking under archways of granite that he would have walked into. He noticed, even through his bewilderment and the cold and the residual shock of having nearly had his skull ventilated, that she moved beautifully. There was nothing wasted in how she carried herself. Every step was exact. "Your name," he said when he had closed the gap between them to a reasonable distance. "Snaga Strongtusk." She did not slow, he knew the name. 3 seasons ago, a Strongtusk clan warband had broken the siege at Grafin Pass, turning back a mercenary company that had been burning lowland villages. The warband's leader had ridden a gray horse and carried a double axe, and the lowland folk had not known quite what to make of being saved by orcs. He had heard the story at the Thresh trading post in the way you heard most things at the Thresh trading post, half drowned in ale fumes, and delivered by men who had not actually been there. He had thought the leader was a man. "You led the Grafin relief," he said. She glanced back at him, one brief look. Something in it was not entirely unfriendly. "My war band," she said. "Not mine alone. Where is your war band now?" A silence. "Gone," she said, and the word had the sound of a stone dropped down a very deep well. He did not ask again. He filed it away, the way you file away a crack in the ice, something to know the shape of, something to step around for now. They walked for 2 more hours. The moor darkened and the mist thickened and the standing stones loomed and receded in the murk around them like the ruins of a crowd. Charles knew this ground as well as he knew anything, and he led them off the main track to a crofter's shelter at Wicken Hollow that had been abandoned 3 years prior. Stone walls, a sound roof, a hearth that still drew. He had slept here a dozen times and kept a small cache of supplies under a loose floorstone. Snaga examined the shelter with the thoroughness of someone who intended to survive whatever the night brought, checking the single window, the door hang, the roof edge. Charles set a fire. He was good at fires. It was perhaps the most reliable skill a lone moorland trapper developed after reading ice and mending iron. The peat caught, then the wood, and the shelter filled with a deep, particular warmth. He set water to heat and found dried meat and oatmeal in his pack, and started something that would at least be warm and filling, if not exactly dinner. When he looked up, Snaga was watching the fire with an expression he could not read, or rather, an expression he recognized but had not expected to see on a face that had looked, outside in the wind, like a carved fortress. She looked tired. Not weak, never that, but tired in the deep way that had nothing to do with the pace they had walked and everything to do with the thing she was carrying that he did not yet know the name of. She caught him looking and the expression closed. "Wulfric Don," she said. "Tell me what you know of him," Charles told her. Don ran a land brokerage out of Thresh that was a legitimate front for a great deal that was not legitimate: stolen furs, forged land claims, enforcement work that crossed into murder. He was a fat man with clever eyes who drank at the Copper Helm on Tuesdays and Fridays, and whose enforcers wore gray scarves. The blood price, the tradition of paying an assassin to remove a problem, originating in the clan territories but long since adopted in various forms by lowland criminal men who liked the economy of it, was a Don specialty. He was known to have placed 3 that Charles knew of. All 3 targets were dead. "What have you done to earn it?" Snaga asked. "I have been wondering that since your knife hit that stone," Charles said honestly. "I buy my licenses at the Thresh Trade Office. I sell legal fur. I do not steal. I have had no dealings with Don." "You have had dealings with something that touched Don," she said. "Think," he thought, stirring the oatmeal. The fire popped. Outside, rain began, a soft, persistent moorland rain that would make the tracks into soup by morning. "3 weeks ago," he said slowly, "I found a man on the high moor, north of Blacktarn, near the Kell Stones. He had been left for dead, stripped of his pack, beaten badly. He was alive. I brought him down to Thresh and left him at the healer's house." Snaga was very still. What did this man look like? Charles described him. Young, perhaps 20, dark-haired, with a split lip and a fresh brand on his left wrist. The healer, Marta, had taken him in without asking much. Charles had not stayed, he had a line to run. "His name," Snaga said, "is Torvis. He was a messenger for my clan. He was carrying documents north to us from a solicitor in the lowland city. Documents proving land right to the Coldwater Moor. Not for you. For the Strongtusk clan. My people hold treaty right on this ground going back 4 generations, and Wulfric Don has been quietly forging quitclaim documents to sell the same land to a lowland merchant consortium." She paused. "If Torvis is alive and the documents are intact, Don's fraud can be proved. He knows we found out. He wants everyone who has touched that evidence or touched Torvis removed." The fire crackled. Charles stared into it. "So I nearly got shot in the head because I carried a wounded man to a healer." "Yes. And you are here because I was following Torvis when I lost him on the moor in the fog," she said. "Because he is my responsibility. Because Don's men caught his trail and I caught Don's men's trail, and that trail led to you on the track, about to take an arrow in the skull." The silence between them was different now, warmer somehow, or at least more honest. "The Coldwater Moor," Charles said. "I have been trapping it for 4 years. I know," he absorbed that. "Your clan's land. Our treaty land. which means under the old conventions, any use right you hold was granted by the treaty clan, whether Thresh's trade office put it in writing or not. Her amber eyes met his steadily. I am not here to tell you to leave. I am telling you what is true. It was, he thought, a very particular kind of honesty, the kind that gives you the difficult thing whole rather than breaking it into manageable pieces first. He found he respected it. What do we do about Don? He asked. We get to Torvis and the documents before Don's men do. We get them to the regional magistrate at Hollowthorn before Don can bribe his way past anyone at Thresh. She pulled her knee up, rested her forearm on it, watching the fire with those amber eyes. And we do not die in the process. Simple enough, Charles said. She looked at him again, and this time there was something at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, the shadow of one. Simple enough, she said. They slept in shifts. Charles took the first watch, sitting near the door with his hunting knife across his knees, and he listened to the rain and the moor and tried very hard not to think about how close that arrow had been. When he woke Snaga at the second hour, her hand was already on her knife before she was fully upright, and she blinked at him once with those amber eyes and said nothing, and he went asleep in the warmth of the fire and had, for the first time in weeks, no dreams. Morning came cold and clear. The rain had stopped. The moor gleamed. They moved fast, heading back south and east toward Thresh, aiming for Marta the healer's house. Snaga moved even faster in daylight. Charles had to stretch his legs to keep up, and he was not a slow man. She read the land ahead of them without breaking stride, occasionally altering course with a gesture rather than an explanation, and he followed each adjustment because she had already proven she knew things he did not. They talked as they walked. Not constantly, not chattily, but in the particular way of people who are working together at something that requires real coordination, questions that mattered, answers that were complete. He learned that Snaga had led the Strongtusk warband for 3 years before disease had taken nearly half of them over a single winter, and the remainder had scattered to allied clans and smaller bands. She had sent them because she could feed them better elsewhere. She had not gone with them because the land claim was still unresolved, and there was still work to do. She had been on the moor alone for 7 months. 7 months alone on the Coldwater Moor in winter. Charles had done it for 4 years, and he knew exactly what 7 months of it felt like. And he knew equally exactly what it felt like to have been the person who sent others to safety while remaining in the cold yourself. He did not say any of this, but he thought about it. He told her about the trap line, the routes, the shelters, the places where the ground was reliable and the places where it was not. He told her because she was on the moor and she needed to know, and because he had noticed she filed information away with the same precision with which she planted her feet, and he found it deeply satisfying to tell something to someone who would actually use it. Thresh sat in a fold of low ground, where the Coldwater stream came down off the moor and hit the valley road. It was a market town, small and gray-stoned, with a trading post and a blacksmith and several taverns, and the trade office where Charles bought his licenses. It also had a population that held the typical lowland opinion of orcs, which was to say a mixture of fear, hostility, and the particular kind of sneering that Charles had always found more cowardly than the outright fear, since it disguised itself as reasonableness. Snaga had not been inside Thresh. She knew this without being told, and she told him this without embarrassment or self-pity, simply as a logistical fact. She would wait on the north road while he went to Marta's house. He shook his head. Marta's house is on the south side of Thresh, through the market square, he said. If Don's people are watching for either of us, splitting up on the approaches is how we get killed one at a time. She considered this. The people of Thresh will not welcome me. No, but I will be next to you, and I know where every alley goes, and I know which of Don's grace-carved men drink where, and you can put a knife through a moving target from 30 yards. He looked at her. I would rather walk through Thresh together than worry about what has happened to you while I am on the south side and you are on the north. She studied him for a long moment. The amber eyes were measuring. He had the feeling of being read very precisely. "All right," she said. They came into Thresh from the North Road as the market was setting up stalls going out, carts clogging the gate, a general noisy press of bodies and livestock that provided, at least initially, a degree of cover. Charles kept them to the edges of the square, moving with the kind of casual purpose that he hoped did not look like either fleeing or skulking. He was aware of eyes finding Snaga. It was impossible not to be. She was striking in every sense, and of the particular quality of silence that spread outward from each set of eyes as they connected with what they were seeing. A murmur, a nudge. A woman pulling her child closer. Snaga walked straight and without hurry. She looked at no one and explained herself to no one, and her chin was at precisely the angle of a person who has decided that the opinions of this particular street are not a load she intends to carry. Charles felt something move in him, watching her, something fierce and admiring. They were almost through the square when a man stepped into their path. He was broad-shouldered and wore a gray scarf, and had the flat eyes of someone who had gotten paid to hurt people enough times that hurting people had stopped requiring any particular motivation. "Sutton," the man said. His eyes did not leave Snaga. "Interesting company you are keeping." "Morning, Hatter," Charles said pleasantly. "We are just passing through. Mr. Don wants a word with you." "Mr. Don can send a letter." Hatter's hand moved toward his belt. Snaga's knife was already in her hand, point resting lightly against Hatter's inner wrist, and Charles was genuinely not certain he had seen her move. The motion had been that fast. "We are passing through," Snaga said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Your hand stays still. You walk away. Nobody has to explain anything to anyone." Hatter breathed through his nose. His hand did not move. After a moment he stepped aside. They walked on. Behind them, Charles heard Hatter say something to someone in a low voice, but no one followed. "Thank you," Charles said quietly once they were around the corner. Snaga resheathed the knife. He would have drawn. "I know, I was running the numbers on that." "What were the numbers?" "Not good." "No," she agreed, not smug, just accurate. Marta's house was a low stone building at the end of a lane on the south side of Thresh, with drying herbs hanging in bunches outside the door, and the smell of rendered tallow and something medicinal drifting from within. Charles knocked. Marta opened the door. She was a stout woman in her 50s with sharp gray eyes and flour on her hands, and she looked at Charles and then at Snaga and then back at Charles with the equanimity of someone who had seen a great deal of the world's stranger corners and had decided not to waste energy on surprise. "Charles Sutton," she said, "and Strongtusk clan, or I have forgotten how to read ink." She was looking at the clan marks on Snaga's shoulders. "Come in, both of you, quickly." Torvis was alive. He was thin and pale, and his wrist was bandaged over the brand, and he sat up in the cot when they came in with the immediate alertness of someone who had been sleeping lightly for weeks. He recognized Snaga, and his whole face changed relief, and something younger than relief, like a boy who has been lost finding something known and safe. "War Chief," he said. "Still breathing," Snaga said, and there was more warmth in those two words than in anything else Charles had heard her say, and he tucked that away too. The documents were there. Torvis had hidden them in the lining of the cot's straw mattress. 17 pages of forged quitclaims, stamped with Don's mark, alongside 3 original treaty documents in Orc script that the forged papers were designed to replace. Marta had not looked at any of it, she said, because she had been trained that not looking at things was sometimes the safest nursing approach. The magistrate's office at Hollowthorne was 60 miles east, 2 days' hard travel on the Valley Road. The Valley Road ran through Thresh's east gate. "Don knows," Snaga said. "He will have that gate watched." "Don will have everything watched," Charles said. He was looking at the documents, thinking. "Unless he is occupied with something else." Marta refilled her kettle. "There is," she said casually, "a matter at the Copper Helm this afternoon that Wulfric Don has been looking forward to greatly. He is to preside over the sale by bond of a disputed property on the moorland edge, the bond sale. He does love those, Very public, very official seeming, very much his favorite way of laundering a land grab. She set down her kettle. He will be at the copper helm from midday to the third bell, with most of his men around him because he likes to be protected when he is being legitimate in public. Charles and Snaga looked at each other. 60 miles east, Charles said. With Don's attention on the copper helm for 3 hours, and his men concentrated there, Snaga said, Torvis can ride. I can ride, Torvis said firmly from the cot. Then we are going to the east gate at midday, Charles said, and we are going to be very fast. It was not quite that clean. Nothing ever was. They borrowed horses from a man named Fenwick at the East End stable. Charles had done Fenwick a good turn 2 winters prior involving a lost mule and a blizzard, and Fenwick had the sort of memory for good turns that made him a valuable person to know. 3 horses, a bay and 2 roans, with reasonable saddles and enough road sense to move fast without needing constant direction. Torvis was pale but upright. Snaga checked his seat once with her hands, adjusted the stirrup length without asking permission, and said he would do. They went out the east gate at 20 minutes past midday. For about 400 yards everything was fine. Then Charles looked back, from pure habit, and saw 2 horsemen coming out of the gate behind them at a pace that was not casual. "We have company," he said. Snaga had already turned to look. She turned back to face east, and her heels went into the bay's sides, and Charles and Torvis followed her lead, and the road became a blur of gray stone and open sky, and the hard percussion of hooves. The valley road ran flat for the first 10 miles, before rising into the low eastern hills. Charles knew this ground from supply runs. He knew the fork at Millhaven and the river crossing at Coldbridge, and the rough trail that cut north of the main road past an abandoned farm, saving perhaps 3 miles. He called ahead to Snaga, described it. She adjusted left at the fork without hesitation, trusting him completely, and he felt the weight of that trust like something physical. The farm trail was rough, but the pursuers were on the main road and did not see the fork in time. And by the time they had backtracked and found the correct turn, Charles and Snaga and Torvis were beyond the eastern hills, and the 2 horsemen had become a pale smear of dust in the distance behind them. They kept the pace up until the horses needed it reduced, then rode steadily, eating the miles. The country east of the hills was softer farms, hedgerows, the occasional village with a church spire and a smell of bread, and the standing stones gave way to tilled fields. Charles watched Snaga's profile as they rode. The way the open country made her easier, somehow still watchful, but less defended, like something that had been wound tight for a long time being allowed to loosen a single degree. They camped that night at the roadside, in a hollow off the main track with a screen of old thorn trees. Torvis ate well and slept quickly. Charles and Snaga sat by a small fire. The moor was behind them now. The documents were in Snaga's pack. Hollowthorn was perhaps 20 miles ahead, and they would reach it by midday tomorrow. He put more wood on the fire. The stars were out, a cold, brilliant spread of them, the kind you only got this far from town. "You have been doing this alone for 7 months, Charles said. He was not being careful about it. He was simply saying a true thing. Snaga did not answer immediately. She sat with her forearms resting on her knees, looking at the fire. The light moved across her face, the strong cut of her jaw, the curve of her tusks, the particular quality of stillness she had when she was not in motion. "Yes," she said. "And before that you sent your people away. Fed them better, I told you. Fed them better and stayed on the moor alone. Someone had to. Strongtusk warband leader," Charles said, "alone on the Coldwater Moor in 7 months of winter, working a one-woman campaign to save her clan's land right, and no one knows." She looked at him then. The amber eyes in the firelight were unguarded in a way he had not seen them in daylight. "Why would they need to know?" "They do not need to," he said. "I am just saying I see it." Something moved in her face. A very small thing, but he saw it. She was quiet for a long moment. The fire breathed. Torvis snored softly under his blanket. "You were also alone," she said. 4 years on that moor. I was. Does it bother you, the alone part?" He considered being honest and decided it was the only currency worth spending with her. "It used to not," he said. "Lately it has been bothering me more." She did not fill that silence with something soft. She let it stand. But she stayed beside him and did not move away, and the fire between them felt like a shared thing rather than two solitudes pointed at the same source of warmth. In the morning, they rode the final 20 miles to Hollowthorne. The magistrate's office was in a square stone building on the main street, a proper building, with a seal above the door and clerks who looked affronted by everything. The magistrate herself was a thin woman named Aldara, 40-some years old, with ink-stained fingers and the manner of a person who had heard every variety of complaint and dispensed with them quickly. She received them in a wood-paneled room with shelves of ledgers and the smell of old paper, and she looked at the documents for 45 seconds and then looked up at Snaga and said, "You are Strongtusk clan, war chief." "Yes. These are the original treaty documents." It was not a question. "And these are forgeries." She picked up one of the forged quitclaims and held it to the windowlight with a practiced eye. "Don's seal. I know his seal." She set them down. "How did these come to your possession?" Snaga laid out the chain without embellishment. "Torvis. The attack on the moor, Charles's finding of Torvis, Marta's care, the documents in the mattress." She did not rush and she did not soften and she did not explain herself in any way except to answer the question that had been asked. Charles sat beside her and added the parts he knew, and Torvis, who was looking better for the night's sleep and the morning's riding, confirmed his own account with the clarity of someone who had been rehearsing it in his head for weeks. Aldara wrote. She wrote for a long time, and while she wrote, Snaga sat straight in her chair and looked at nothing in particular with those amber eyes, and Charles watched her hands in her lap still, relaxed, patient, and thought that he had never in his life met a person more comfortable in their own skin. The magistrate set down her pen. "I am issuing a writ of investigation against Wulfric Don, effective today. The treaty land right stands as documented. Don's quitclaims are invalid and will be so registered." She looked at Snaga. "Your clan's title to the Coldwater Moor is confirmed. I would advise getting this registered with the regional land court in the next 30 days, and I would further advise that someone with a strong interest in the outcome make that journey." "I will make it," Snaga said. "Good." Aldara looked at Charles. "Sutton. Your use-right licenses were purchased in good faith from the Thresh Trade Office, which was operating under the mistaken assumption that the quitclaims were valid. The land court will need to confirm your status, but given the circumstances, I expect you will be grandfathered in." A dry pause, provided the treaty holder agrees. Both of them looked at Snaga. Snaga's eyes moved to Charles. "His licenses are valid," she said. "He has been on the moor without harm to it for 4 years. Treaty custom grants use right to persons of good standing on the landholder's word." A brief pause. "He is of good standing." He felt that more than he expected to. They stepped out of the magistrate's office into Hollowthorne's main street, blinking in the midday sun. Torvis was smiling, properly smiling, his whole young face cracked open with it. He said something in Orc tongue to Snaga that Charles did not catch, and she replied in the same language, brief and rough, and the smile did not diminish at all. "What did he say?" Charles asked. "He said the moor smells better than it did yesterday." "What did you say?" The not-quite smile came back to the corner of her mouth. "I said it does." They were not yet finished. Wulfric Don still had men on the roads, and the writ of investigation would take days to reach Thresh. And a man with Don's resources and motivation was not the sort to stop moving simply because the legal ground had shifted. Hollowthorne had a constable's post that would eventually deal with him, but eventually was not the same as now, and there was still the matter of the bond sale. Torvis went with the magistrate's clerk to have his testimony formally recorded. Charles and Snaga walked through Hollowthorne, which was larger and more varied than Thresh, with a covered market and several inns and a river running through the low end of town. The people here looked at Snaga the way people in market towns looked at everything unusual with curiosity, some wariness, a few outright unfriendly stares. But it was a larger town, and the unfriendliness was more diffuse, and she moved through it the same way she moved through everything, without apology and without aggression, simply present in her own body in the world. Charles bought bread and dried apple from a market stall and handed half of it to her. She took it without making anything of it, not the casual intimacy of the gesture, not the fact that he had done it automatically, as if feeding her when he bought food for himself was simply the natural order. But she ate the bread and did not put distance between them as they walked. "Don will move the bond sale up," Charles said. "If word gets back to him before the writ arrives, he will try to execute the transaction before it is invalidated." "The Copper Helm bond sale," Snaga said. "The one we used as a distraction." "The property being sold is the Wicken Hollow Croft," Charles said. "The one where we slept. It is on the moor edge, technically Strongtusk treaty land under the now confirmed title. Don is trying to sell it to the Lowland Merchant Consortium as proof of his right to the wider moor. If he executes that sale, the consortium will have legal standing to contest the magistrate's decision." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "The sale is today," she said, "at the Copper Helm in Thresh. An hour's ride back west." Her amber eyes were measuring the calculation. "If Don completes that sale before the writ reaches Thresh, the consortium has standing," Charles confirmed. "It will not undo the treaty right, but it will slow everything by months while the courts sort it out. Don knows this. It is why he scheduled the bond sale the same day." She was already turning back toward the stable where they had left the horses. "We are going back to Thresh," she said. "We are going back to Thresh," he agreed, and he was already beside her. They came into Thresh from the east as the third bell rang from the Market Square Tower, the bell that marked the opening of the Copper Helm's afternoon session. The bond sale was public by custom, done in the main room of the tavern with witnesses and the seal set on the bond in front of whoever showed up. Don loved the public nature of it. He liked the authority it lent him. He liked to be seen. The Copper Helm was packed. Don had drawn a crowd, merchants, farmers, a handful of town officials who owed him favors, and the gray-scarfed men posted at the edges with the careful readiness of men who expected that someone might object and were prepared to handle the objection. Don himself stood at the front of the room behind a table covered in papers, round and well-dressed, with the eyes of a man who was finishing something he had been planning for a long time. Charles and Snaga came through the front door together. The room noticed. It was impossible for the room not to notice. Charles Sutton, the trapper from the Coldwater line who Don wanted dead, walking in alive and unhurried, and beside him a Strongtusk orc woman who stood half a head taller than most of the men in the room and wore her clan ink and did not look remotely as though she intended to be quiet. Don's face went through several shades. "The sale of the Wicken Hollow property," Charles said, loudly enough for the room, "is of the Coldwater Moor Treaty land. Strongtusk clan treaty right, confirmed this morning by the magistrate at Hollowthorn." He reached into his coat and put the copy of the magistrate's statement on the nearest table. Aldara had given them each a copy. The woman thought ahead, and then he looked at Don. "The sale cannot be completed. The land is not yours to sell." The room had gone very quiet. Don's clever eyes moved from Charles to Snaga and back. His hand made a small movement, and two gray-scarfed men began to push through the crowd toward Charles. Snaga stepped forward. Not quickly, there was nothing rushed or frightened in it. She simply moved to stand between Charles and the advancing men, and she looked at Don and she said, "My treaty right, my land, my witness statement at Hollowthorn, my writ." She picked up the magistrate's copy from the table and held it up so the room could see the seal. "Every person in this room is a witness that this sale was attempted on Strongtusk treaty land. Every person in this room is also a witness to what happens if your men take another step." Her free hand rested on the hilt of her knife. The two gray-scarfed men stopped. The room was holding a collective breath. Charles watched it, the townspeople, the merchants, the officials who owed Don favors and were now doing rapid calculations about what favors were worth in the current circumstances, and he watched the particular moment when the balance shifted. It was visible somehow. the way a standing stone in winter begins to lean before it falls. A man at the back of the room said clearly, "If the magistrate has confirmed the treaty right, the sale is void." He was a gray-haired merchant who Charles recognized as one of the more careful men in Thresh, the kind who stayed legitimate because it was good for business in the long run. "I will not witness this transaction." Another voice. "Nor will I." Don's face had gone from several shades to something more uniform and final. He was a man who understood numbers, and the numbers in the room were no longer his. "This is not over," he said. "It is for today," Snaga replied. Don's gray-scarfed men stepped back. The crowd began to murmur and then to move, the way a crowd does when the event is effectively concluded, and people are eager to be elsewhere before they are asked to formally take a side. Charles watched Don collect his papers with the careful movements of a man maintaining dignity, while inside he was calculating his next 4 moves. The constable arrived, as constables always do, about 5 minutes after the crisis had resolved itself. He looked at Charles, looked at Snaga, looked at the magistrate's copy on the table and took a long breath. "I will need statements," he said. "You will have them," Charles said. They spent another hour in Thresh, in the constable's office on the square, giving statements. The constable sent a rider to Hollowthorne. The writ of investigation against Don was now in the legal machinery, and with the failed bond sale witnessed by half the room at the Copper Helm, Don's position had become very fragile very quickly. Charles had enough experience of frontier towns to know that the moment the balance shifted, the people who had been cautiously supporting the stronger side would begin cautiously supporting the other one, and Don's careful empire of favors would start to dissolve. Torvis arrived from Hollowthorne by the time they were done, riding a borrowed horse with his testimony in hand. He had the look of someone who had been very frightened for a long time and was now beginning to relax, and he could not stop looking at Snaga with the expression of a man who has just watched someone he admires do the thing he admired them for. Evening came down over Thresh, and Charles thought about his 40 miles of trap line and his shelters and the cache under the floorstone at Wicken Hollow, and said nothing about any of it. Snaga found him at the edge of the market square as the stalls were putting up for the night, standing by the well, looking north toward the moor. "Torvis is at the inn," she said. "He will ride to the land court tomorrow to register the title. Without us, he knows the road." She stood beside him, not close enough to touch, but close. The square was emptying around them. "He does not need me to hand-carry him the rest of the way." "What will you do?" Charles asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Go back to the moor," she said. "Someone has to check that Don's men have not left any problems behind them up on the high ground." "That is true," Charles said. "Someone should also check my trap line. I have been gone 2 days." She looked at him sidelong. In the evening light, her amber eyes were very warm, and she was almost smiling, the full version, not just the shadow of it. "You are suggesting we go back together," she said. "I am saying 2 people who know the moor and have a common interest in its safety might reasonably walk north together," he said. "Yes. That is very careful reasoning for what is actually a simple thing. The simple thing being," she held his gaze, "I am not finished with you, Charles Sutton." The warmth that moved through him at that was entirely disproportionate to the temperature of the evening. "I am not finished with you either," he said. And then, because he was a man who preferred honesty to safety, "I'm not sure I will ever be finished with you if I am being exact about it." She studied him, that precision reading of his face that he had come to recognize and improbably enjoy. It was not easy to be read that exactly. Most people did not look closely enough. "You mean that?" she said. "I do." She said nothing, but she turned north, toward the moor road, and she did not walk away from him when she did it. They left Thresh as the last light left the sky, walking north together on the road that Charles had walked alone 400 times, and it felt nothing like those 400 times. The moor received them back the way the moor always received a returning person, indifferently, magnificently, with the ancient disregard of a place that was there before anyone and would be there after. The standing stones materialized out of the dark. The peat smell came up. The stars burned overhead with the same cold brilliance as the previous night. But they were walking now instead of riding, and Charles felt the good ache of it in his legs, and the very specific satisfaction of moving toward somewhere particular with someone beside him. They reached the overnight shelter on the track north, a different one from Wicken Hollow, a smaller croft shelter at a place called Greywing that Charles had repaired and restocked the previous spring, and he made a fire and Snaga checked the perimeter with the same thoroughness she had applied to every shelter they had used. Old habit. He was beginning to understand that it was not anxiety, but simply the practice of a person who had survived a long time by not being careless. They ate from his pack better fare this time, because before they left Thresh he had bought properly from a market stall, and the pack held proper bread and salt meat, and a small pot of preserved fruit that he had bought on impulse without examining his motives too carefully. After they ate, the fire settled to a steady orange bed, and Snaga sat with her back against the croft's stone wall and her long legs stretched toward the warmth, and something about the set of her shoulders was different from every previous evening. "You want to ask me things," she said, not accusingly, just naming what was true. "I have wondered about things," he said carefully. "I have not pushed." "I know." She looked at the fire. "You have not pushed about any of it. Not Grayfin, not the war band, not the 7 months, not why I am here alone when a Strongtusk warchief should have people around her." A pause. "Most people push. Most people push because they want the information for themselves," Charles said. "I am not sure I have been waiting because I expected you to eventually tell me. I have been waiting because I thought you would tell me if you wanted to, and I was in no hurry to make you do something you did not want to do." She looked at him then directly, and the firelight was full on her face. The amber eyes were open. The careful fortress that she had carried in her face was not gone. It was always there, built over a long time out of materials that did not dissolve quickly, but the gate of it was open and she was standing in the opening. "Grayfin was not what the stories say," she said. "The stories say we broke the siege. We did. The stories do not say that we lost 17 people doing it, or that 8 of those were people I had led directly into a flanking position that I had assessed as manageable and was wrong about, or that I sat in the dark outside Grayfin afterward for a very long time." Charles said nothing. He kept his eyes on her, and his expression simply open. "The warband was strong for 2 years after Grayfin. We were known. We had worked good work, protecting supply lines, escorting clan caravans through contested territory. Then the winter sickness came. It came fast and it was very bad, and I watched people die that I had kept alive through 2 years of fighting, and it was nothing I could fight. There was nothing to put a knife into." She breathed slowly. "I sent the survivors to allied clans because I could not feed them or house them through another winter of that. I told myself it was practical. It was also the hardest thing I have ever done." "And you stayed," Charles said. "Someone had to hold the land claim, and she stopped. Began again. I did not know where else to go. The moor is ours, was ours, and I was not ready to go somewhere I did not belong and be among people who would look at me and see what I had lost." He understood that with a completeness that required no translation. "The alone part," he said. "It bothered you too." "Yes." Direct, no softening. "It bothered me very much. I am not someone who frightens easily, but 7 months is a long time to be the only person who knows you are still alive." She looked at the fire for a long moment. "Then I saw you on the track, nearly taking an arrow, and I threw the knife, and afterward you looked at me the way you looked at me, and I thought, this one is not afraid. Not of the tusks or the ink or the fact that I can drop a man with one hand. He is just here." She paused. "Most people are not just here with me." "You were just here with me," he said quietly. "From the beginning, you did not make anything of what I am. You just worked with what was in front of you. That is only fair." "It is not only fair," he said. "It is rare. You could have told me to get out of the way. You saved my life and then offered me a choice about whether to follow, and when I followed you treated me like someone worth working with. Not like a human charity case you were tolerating. Like a partner, she said. Yes. The words sat between them in the warmth of the fire, with the sound of the moor outside and the particular feeling of a shelter that was not exactly home, but was as close as either of them had been to that for a long time. I do not explain myself, Snaga said. I have never explained myself. I have found no use in it. People decide what they have decided about what I am, and no explanation changes it. I stopped bothering. She looked at him. I have told you things tonight that I have not told anyone in 3 years, more than that. I know, he said. I was here for it. Does it change what you think of me? He held her gaze. It changes nothing about what I think of you. It adds to it. She studied him. The full, precise attention. He let her look. There was nothing in him he was trying to keep from her. He had no great disasters, no tragic losses, just a man who had made a quiet life on cold ground because he was good at it, and the alternative had never quite materialized. He thought she could probably see all of that. He thought she probably saw most things. Charles, she said, and it was the first time she had used his name, and the sound of it in her voice, low and measured, reached into something in his chest. Why are you not afraid of me? I have thought about that, he said honestly. I think it is because you are exactly what you appear to be. Every part of you that could be frightening is right there in the open. You are strong and direct, and you have a knife in your hand faster than anything I have ever seen, and you have sent better men than me to the ground without breathing hard. I can see all of it. There is nothing hidden to be afraid of. He paused. Hidden things are what frightens me. Dawn frightens me. The moor in the fog frightens me a little still after 4 years. He shook his head. You are the most honest thing I have ever been near. Something in her face changed. Not soft, exactly, she was not a soft woman, and she never would be, but open. The kind of open that was its own form of courage because it cost something. You see me, she said. I see you, he said. All of it, and I am not going anywhere. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the fire, and then she turned to look at him. And what was in her eyes in that moment was more than the amber warmth of the firelight. It was recognition, and something that went beyond it, something that was beginning and was simultaneously the thing that both of them had been running out of time to find. She reached across the small distance between them and put her hand on her hand that had thrown a knife with impossible precision, and held a recurve bow with the ease of someone born to it, her hand that was warm and strong and present. She laid it over his, palm down, not quite holding, not quite anything yet except unmistakably there. The gesture of a person who has decided. He turned his hand over, her fingers closed. In orc courtship custom, she said quietly, the one who claims speaks first. Then speak, he said. She looked at him, and the fortress and the silence and the 7 months of alone and the 3 years of carrying things that had no name fell away from her face, not with drama but with the simple natural motion of something that has been held for too long being set down. I claim you, Charles Sutton, she said. I see you, I choose you. Whatever the moor brings, storm, grace-carved men, magistrates, long winters, I choose to face it with you beside me. That is my claim. Her amber eyes were steady and warm and more open than he had ever seen them. It is your right by custom to accept or refuse. He did not wait. He brought his free hand up and put it over hers, both his hands around hers now, and he said, I accept, freely, without reservation. And then, because he could not help it, I have been wanting to say something like that since the standing stone. A sound came out of her then that he would carry in his memory for the rest of his life. A low, genuine, open laugh, surprised out of her. The kind of laugh that does not belong to a proud fortress of a person who never explains herself. The kind that only comes when someone has taken you completely off your defenses. It was the best thing he had ever heard. He leaned across the small distance between them and kissed her. She let him, and then she met him, and her free hand came up to the side of his face, and the kiss became less tentative and more like the rest of her, direct, honest, unhurried, giving nothing unless she meant it and meaning everything she gave. When they broke apart, the fire had burned lower and the shelter was very warm, and she was still looking at him, close, her hand still against his face. "For a man who spends months at a time not talking to anyone," she said very quietly, "you say the right things. For a woman who never explains herself," he said, equally quiet, "you explained a great deal tonight." She smiled, the full version, no shadow or approximation, the real thing that was broader and warmer and more alive than even his best guess at it had been. And he understood, with the absolute conviction of a man who has been correct about very few things in his life but knows it when it happens, that he was in love with her. He had been falling in that direction since the Standing Stone, or perhaps since the Market Square in Thresh, or perhaps since she had said, simply and without softening it, "The moor smells better than it did yesterday." It did not matter when it had started. It was fully and completely true now. They sat by the fire for a long time after that, talking and not talking in easy alternation, her hand in his, the moor outside them going on forever in the dark. He told her about the trap line in the way he had never told anyone, not the distances and the license numbers but the particular beauty of it, the way the mist lay in the stone circles at dawn, the sound of the lapwings over the high bog, the winter mornings, when the frost made every peat tuft into a small, perfect crown. She listened with her full attention. When he finished, she told him things about the moor from the clan's knowledge, old names for the stone circles, a spring hidden behind the Kell stones that ran sweet water all year, the place on the North Ridge where the clan had made seasonal camp 4 generations back and left carved markers under the heather. "I could show you," she said. "I would like that very much," he said. In the morning, they moved north together toward the high moor, toward the Coldwater trap line and the Standing Stones and the particular vast, cold, beautiful loneliness of the ground they both, in different ways, called home. The world still had problems in it. Wulfric Donn was not yet in a constable's cell. That would take several more weeks, and a process Charles only heard about later. The land court would take its 30 days and its paperwork and its slow official grinding. There were traps to check and snares to reset, and a cache at Wicken Hollow that needed restocking. None of this felt like a problem. They came over the North Ridge as the morning burned off the mist, and the Standing Stones emerged from the gray like the columns of something enormous and patient, and the moor ran out before them in all directions, brown and gold and dark green, and impossibly wide under a sky that was just beginning to turn blue. Snaga stopped on the ridge. Charles stopped beside her. She was looking at it, not with the guarded efficiency of a person surveying for threats, but with the expression of someone looking at a thing they love and have been working very hard and very long to keep. It was the most unguarded he had ever seen her in the open, in daylight, with nothing but the sky above them. He put his hand at the small of her back. She turned to look at him, and then leaned into him just slightly. Not a collapse, not a yielding, nothing that diminished her by a single degree. Just the particular lean of a person who has decided that this is a body they trust, a warmth they are willing to be near. He pulled her in and she let him, and they stood on the ridge with the moor spreading out below them in the cold, clean morning light, and he thought, "This is it. This is the thing you do not know you have been short of until it is present, and then you cannot imagine how you functioned in its absence." In the days that followed, they settled into the trap line together with a naturalness that should have surprised him more than it did. She was not a trapper. She had no feel for the particular patience of iron and snare. But she learned fast, and she was the best tracker he had ever worked beside, reading the ground in ways that supplemented his own knowledge and occasionally corrected it. She showed him the clan's old trails, the shortcuts the Strongtusk had used for generations between the stone circles, and he showed her every shelter and cache he had built, and they resupplied Wicken Hollow and checked the Blacktarn High shelter, and found that Don's men had indeed left one problem behind them, a ruined snare set on the north line, which was more vandalism than real damage, fixed in an hour. They worked well. It was the kind of working well that went beyond competence, the particular ease of two people whose ways of being in the world fit together without forcing, who hand each other things before being asked and step into gaps without discussion, and rest in each other's presence without needing to perform. In the evenings, by the fire, whichever shelter they were at, she was different than the woman on the track. Not unguarded in a reckless way, not stripped of her strength, that was not possible and he would not have wanted it. But open, in the way that she had been on the night she had told him everything. She talked and she listened and she laughed, sometimes, and the laugh was always a surprise, always real. She told him about Grafin in more detail, the battle itself, not the aftermath, which she told with the precise storytelling of someone who had thought about it enough to have found the shape of it. He told her about the 4 winters on the moor and the year before, when he had left the valley town where he had grown up and come north, because he had needed to go somewhere his life did not feel like a coat that did not fit. She understood this without requiring elaboration. The primal charge of orc courtship custom, she had named it in the shelter that first night, I claim you, and he had not forgotten it, not for a moment, meant that the bond between them was, in orc tradition, formally spoken and formally accepted, and that was not a small thing. He had asked her about it the second evening carefully, wanting to understand what it meant. In clan custom, she said, the claiming and the acceptance make the pair. There is no ceremony required beyond the speaking and the witnessing, though the fire is traditional as witness. The fire witnessed, he said. The fire witnessed, she confirmed. We are paired under clan custom, Charles Sutton. If that is too much. It is not too much, he said, and he meant it without reservation or hesitation, and she read him well enough to know that. She had also in those days, quietly and without commentary, begun wearing a piece of his, a leather cord from his pack, nothing significant to anyone else, that she had wound around her wrist once and left there. He noticed it on the second morning and said nothing, but he was aware of it constantly. A small visible thing that meant something in the private language they were building. 2 weeks after Hollowthorn, a rider came up the north track from Thresh. He was a constable's deputy, and he carried a letter which stated that Wulfric Don had been arrested on the writ of investigation, that 3 of his gray-scarfed men had been taken with him, and that the forged land claims had been formally voided. The bond sale of Wicken Hollow was null. The land court at Hollowthorn had registered the Strongtusk treaty title on the Coldwater Moor. Charles read the letter by the doorway of Wicken Hollow Croft, with the moor going on around them in all its eternal wide indifference, and then he handed it to Snaga. She read it. Read it again. She was very still. He watched her and did not say anything. She looked up. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. She folded the letter carefully and put it inside her leather bodice against her skin. The gesture was so quiet and so complete that it moved him more than any dramatic thing could have. "The land court will want me to ride to Hollowthorn to confirm the registration in person," she said. "Within the week, the deputy says." "Then we will go to Hollowthorn," Charles said. She looked at him. "You have a trap line." "The trap line will last without me for a few days. I have been leaving it for longer stretches than that, and it has not dissolved." He held her gaze. "You are not going to Hollowthorn alone. We do things together now. That is what claimed means, if I have understood it." The smile came. "The full version." "You have understood it," she said. They rode to Hollowthorn 3 days later. Torvis met them there. He had stayed to handle the paperwork, and he had done it with the thoroughness of someone repaying a debt, and the registration was complete and clean and held Snaga's name as treaty holder in the land court's official record. He put the sealed document in Snaga's hands in the magistrate's courtyard in the morning light, and she held it and looked at it for a long time. Charles stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She looked up. Over the courtyard wall, the road ran east and south toward the greater lowland cities and west toward the moor, and north toward the sky. "The Strongtusk clan can come back to the moor," she said. She was not addressing him in particular. She was saying it to the world, to the morning, perhaps to the people who were gone. When they are ready, the ground will hold. Charles thought about what it meant to hold something for 7 months alone in the cold so that others could come back to it when they were ready. He thought about what kind of person that required being and what it cost, and that such a person had chosen him. "It will hold," he said. She put the document into her pack carefully and turned to look at him, and she put her hand against his jaw the way she had that first night by the fire, and she said very quietly, "I am ready to stop being alone now." "So am I," he said. She kissed him there in the magistrate's courtyard in Hollowthorne, with Torvis looking studiously at the architecture, and the morning busy around them, and the land court document settled in her pack and the moor waiting west, and it was the most natural thing in the world. They did not ride back to the moor immediately. The land court registration prompted a series of meetings with the regional administrators that took 2 more days, and Charles sat through all of them beside Snaga, and she consulted him on the practical matters: the trap line, the established trails, the seasonal movements of animals across the treaty ground, because he knew things she needed and she did not pretend otherwise. The administrators, who had the manner of people who had never expected to be conducting treaty business with an orc warchief and a moorland trapper in the same meeting, adapted faster than Charles expected them to. Snaga had that effect on rooms. On the second evening, in the common room of the Hollowthorne Inn, she drank watered wine, and he drank ale, and Torvis ate a quantity of food that suggested he had been making up for 2 weeks of convalescence, and they talked about what came next genuinely, practically, not the vague language of possibility, but the specific language of a plan. The clan remnants were at 3 different Allied camps, scattered north and south. Torvis would ride out as messenger, carrying the treaty confirmation and Snaga's word that the moor was secure. It would take months for anyone to come back. People would need to decide, make arrangements, travel. That was all right. The moor would hold. "You could come with me," Snaga said to Charles at one point in the evening when Torvis had gone for more food. "When I go to meet the Allied camps, before anyone comes back to the moor." He looked at her. "You want me to come?" "I want you to come," she said simply. No hedging, no softening. She wanted what she wanted, and she said so, and it was the most direct and the most endearing thing he had ever encountered in a person. "What about the trap line?" "Trap lines can be run in the spring." "You have not left the moor for anything but a supply run in 4 years. Come north with me. See the Allied camps. See where I have been and what I came from." A pause. "Meet the people who will eventually be your neighbors on the treaty ground." He thought about 40 miles of peat and iron and cold and the particular silence of a man who has not spoken to another person in 2 weeks. He thought about the fire at Wicken Hollow and the ridge in the morning light and her hand on his face. "I will need to sell the line's current catch first," he said. "There is a buyer in Thresh." "1 day in Thresh," she said. "1 day in Thresh," he agreed. "And then north." She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the same gesture as the first night, but easier now, more owned, the gesture of someone who has staked their claim and is comfortable with it. He thought about what Torvis had said on the road in orc tongue that she had translated as "the moor smells better." He thought he now knew what that had actually meant, and he thought Torvis had been entirely right. They rode back to Thresh together, the 3 of them in the autumn light. Thresh looked different than it had, or rather it looked the same, gray-stoned and modest and smelling of tallow and river mud, but Charles walked through it differently with Snaga beside him. Not cautiously, not scanning for gray scarves. Don was in a cell. His men were scattered. The gray-scarved threat was gone, and the town knew it. The constable's deputy nodded to them on the square. A woman from the market stall where Charles bought dried apple nodded to them both. Not warmly in the woman's case, there was still the old weight of prejudice in her careful look, but she nodded. As to people who existed and had legitimate standing in the world, it was a small thing. It was not nothing. Charles sold the catch to the Thresh buyer, a fair transaction that took about an hour and left him with enough coin to make the northern trip comfortably. He bought supplies, good ones, enough for the road. He went to Marta's house and thanked her, and she looked at him with the sharp gray eyes and said, "You look different, Sutton." He said he expected he did. She looked past him to where Snaga was waiting in the street and said, "Good," and closed the door. He stood in the street with the pack on his shoulder and Snaga standing in the autumn light with her travel leathers and her clan ink and the leather cord from his pack on her wrist, and the moor road running north behind her. She looked at him. "Ready?" she said. He thought about the trap line, the iron and the snare and the cold shelter and the weeks without speaking. He thought about everything it had given him and what it had cost him in a different currency entirely. He thought about the standing stone and the arrow and the first moment he had seen her drop from the granite outcropping and plant her feet and hold the whole wide moor in her gaze. He settled the pack on his shoulder and crossed the street to where she stood. "Ready," he said. She turned north. He walked beside her, their strides matching on the road, the town falling away behind them, the moor opening up ahead, vast and gray and ancient, and theirs, the two of them heading into it together with no particular plan beyond north and forward and each other. Some things deserve to be done without explanation. The choosing of a direction, the keeping of a claim, the particular quiet courage of two people who have been alone long enough deciding to be alone no longer. They walked north. The standing stones received them. The moor went on forever in every direction. Above them, the sky was clearing.